Sorry I got started late. I looked up and it's 8:20. It's like, what? I'm late. I got lost on Twitter. I was researching stuff real quick before this live stream, and I got lost on Twitter. You know, it's easy to get sucked into social media. So my apologies, but I am here now and we're going to talk about disabilities, and I'm actually a little bit prepared. So let me see if I can share my screen. I was going to look that up too, but I didn't want to be any more late than I already am. Oh, let's see. Help. Frequently asked questions about Twitch TV. How to share screen on PC. Let's see if it tells me how to do it. Capturing sources with Twitch Studio. Screen share. Okay, screen share. Alrighty. I have two options. Change capture and select your desired source. Ooh, it's powerful. Okay, so that's easy to do. I think I can do that. Okay, so let me look on here and change my source. Let's see, or add a source, add layer, browser source. Yeah. Alrighty, add. Okay, and I will put that here because I don't want to cover up the chat, so I'll put it right over everything. Okay, save. All right, now let's try going to my screen. Let's see. Here's my outline for the evening. I don't know if that's showing or not. Apparently it is not. So what am I doing wrong? I do not know what I'm doing wrong. Well, maybe I didn't save it once I added it. Let me see. Browser source. Let me try putting it over here. Yeah, the chat can be under it. That might work. Let me save that. All right, now if I go to my screen, you should be able to see what's on my screen. I don't know if you can. Let's see. Oh, my customer satisfaction survey. Okay. Consistency of speed, thoroughness of information, understandable, ability to sort, narrow choices, visual appeal, balance of graphics and text, overall satisfaction. Yep. Very likely to recommend cdc.gov to someone else. I'm very likely to visit it in the future. I was able to find what I was looking for. Yes, I was looking for coronavirus info. Yes, I found it. For myself and family, and for my internet family out there. Let's see, I was looking for grief resources for people with disabilities for my live stream tonight. Period. Okay, they probably weren't expecting that. Lots of specific info that is friendly to to lay people. Okay, what can we do? Can't think of anything. All right, what brought you to CDC? Well, search engine results, because I looked them up. Clearly communicated? Yes. The pages you read allow you to take action? Yes, I'm sharing them with y'all tonight. How would you describe your experience while visiting cdc.gov today? I had no difficulty navigating the site. I was looking for specific information, so what? Educational materials, I suppose? Yeah. Fact sheets. Well, educational materials. Okay. Yeah. My preferred way is electronically. Planning to use the information for teaching purposes. How frequently do you use the site? Maybe weekly. Primary role. Let's see. I can't really say I'm an educator, teacher, or trainer. Other. GrannyHandicap. Live stream on Twitch. I talk about disability issues. From what location are you accessing the CDC site today? Home. How old are you? I am 50 to 64. Are you Hispanic or Latino? No. How would you describe yourself? White. Highest level of education? Some college. My gender is female. Can't think of anything. Okay, submit. And I have taken care of their survey, which will help other people. And now I can go boop, boop. And let's go to the first site that here we go. So we're on the CDC site. It's not showing up on the screen. Why? Why is it not showing up on the screen? I don't know how to share my screen. If we were doing Zoom, I could. Oh, Academy Impossible, welcome. Good to see you tonight. I really don't. I shouldn't say that's horrible DJ practice. I should remember that from my DJ days. No dead air, and don't do stuff like that. So, sorry about that. So, here I am. I can't share my screen with you. This is driving me nuts. I don't know how to do this. And I'm not really. It's been a horrible 3 weeks. I just don't even know how to I can barely get on a live stream, to tell you the truth. I'm exhausted. I'm not sleeping well. I'm just absolutely. And I got told that I shouldn't mention anything about certain people, so I am not talking about anything but me and my daughter, Tass. So, grief does horrible things to people. It tears them apart. So, you know, we just deal with it, right? At least I can say that the crisis seems to be over. Uh, Somebody got to leave the hospital. Yay! So I'm very happy about that. But one person didn't get to leave the hospital, and this is just scary because there's a big grief situation. So I thought I would talk about grief today, especially as it pertains to COVID-19. So I'm going to go over to this first link that I want to share with you, and let me get that in the chat. This is a toolkit for people with disabilities, and I think it's an excellent resource. It is from the CDC site, so I will put this in the chat so that you can see what I'm talking about. So, here's the website and the link, and I think I posted this on Twitter. I got distracted because Honey was having an Xbox One giveaway. I love giveaways if it's a reputable place. And I've used Honey before, so I thought, well, why not? I couldn't find my account, so I had to create a new one. But anyway, so I put the link up on Twitter, and then I realized that to enter the sweepstakes, you have to put your personal link. So I tweeted out that, and people who follow me are probably going to go, this girl is sending spam. Oh, I can't stand it. But I'm not going to say anything more about it because I'm not trying to spam anybody. I just want to win an Xbox if I can. My Xbox is about 6 years old, so, And I realize that my chances of winning that are minuscule. So, but, it doesn't hurt. If I don't enter, I definitely won't win. So this gives me a little something to look forward to. So, it's my way of coping with all the stress and stuff, At least I know Honey won't spam me. So, anyway. So, back to the toolkit for people with disabilities. So, I was watching Dr. Mike last night, and he was saying the reason he does that beep because when you change subjects on a live stream, it's his logic was to just put some random noise in there so that it marks on the tape when you're going to another subject. So I've got to think of a noise. I don't know what kind of noise I could make. I could do something like that might be a transition noise. Maybe it needs to be a little more, I don't know. But anyway, back to the toolkit for people with disabilities, guidance and tools to help people with disabilities. So I'm gonna look at that and give you my thoughts. There's a whole bunch of stuff on here. Oh, okay, there's posters. Let's see if I can get a poster in here. Stop the spread of germs, wash your hands. Symptoms of corona, but I'm not seeing, let's see. Coronavirus masks, testing information, pets and COVID. Well, pets and COVID. Oh, that's cute. Videos. Okay. Let's see if they've got anything on grief. Things you can do to manage it at home, symptoms, social distancing. Let's see. Not really anything that I can put up on my subject. So, let me just. Alright, this toolkit has a lot of resources. So, let's look at guidance and planning documents. Let's see. Caregivers. A guide for caregivers or people with disabilities. Alright, let's see. This is one of the links in the document that I put the link to. Some people with disabilities might be more likely to get infected or have severe illness because of underlying medical conditions, congregate living settings, or systemic health and social inequities. All people with serious underlying chronic medical conditions seem to be more likely to get severely ill. Adults with disabilities are 3 times more likely than adults without disabilities to have heart disease, which I don't have, diabetes, which I don't have, cancer, which I don't have, or a stroke, which I haven't had. So, disability groups and risk. If you have one of the disability types listed below, you might be at increased risk. Okay, people who have limited mobility. Yep, that's me. Or who cannot avoid coming into close contact with others who may be infected, such as direct support providers and family members. People who have trouble understanding information or practicing preventive measures, such as hand washing and social distancing. I don't have that problem. People who might not be able to communicate symptoms of illness. I don't have that problem. But many people probably do. So, if you've got somebody caring for you, people should be washing their hands when they enter your home and before touching you, or when changing linens or doing laundry. And if they're helping you dress or helping you bathe and shower, transfer, toileting or feeding, handling tissues, or when, doing the laundry, your person who helps you should be wearing gloves. So, plan what you will do if you or your direct support provider gets sick. So if your caregiver gets ill, you need to create a contact list of possible family, friends, neighbors, local service agencies that could provide you support in case your main caregiver gets sick or becomes unavailable. Plan at least 2 ways of communicating from home and work that can be used rapidly in an emergency. Landline phone, cell phone, text messaging, email. Write down this information and keep it with you. Have enough household items and groceries that you've got a 30-day supply of over-the-counter prescription medicines, and some health plans allow for a 90-day supply. So consider discussing this option with your healthcare provider. All right, and there's a lot to know about COVID. Risk of infection with COVID is higher for people who are in close contact with someone known to have COVID-19. And, of course, we're all in an area with ongoing spread of COVID-19. Now, if you had a vaccine, you still have to wear a mask and you still have social distance if you don't want to infect people around you, because they've found out that even us vaccinated folks can spread it, even though we're not likely to get very sick. It's like 0.5% of vaccinated people are ending up in the hospital because they always ask if someone has been vaccinated. And usually they ask for proof of those vaccinations. And they are not running up on very many at all who have had both vaccines, if they got Pfizer or Moderna, or the single shot if they got Johnson & Johnson. They're really not seeing that many people end up in the hospital. So if you get the vaccine, it works very well, and it is proven now because millions of people have taken it with no reported long-term effects from the vaccine. However, a lot of people are reporting long-term side effects from COVID, from a COVID infection. So definitely it's better to avoid this stuff. I wish I could tell you what I've gone through these past 3 weeks, because somebody would not get the shot. 2 somebodies. One of those somebodies died. The other one is at home with severe complications. So it's just better for y'all to go get the shot and don't go through what, just don't. Just get your shot. Get your vaccine. Don't be fooled by all the lies that a bunch of media companies have been putting out, because the facts are this vaccine works. And it really worries me that a lot of people are not getting any vaccines for their children. If you walk into any cemetery, pick one, and it's got graves before 1940, and if you look at the sheer number of little graves, you will see the impact of a world with no vaccinations. We've had the smallpox vaccine since the 1700s, and in a matter of fact, George Washington required people to get the smallpox vaccine, and there was a lot of resistance to it, but it was to save human life, because smallpox, it wiped out so many people before they found the vaccine, and a lot of people didn't know about the vaccine, and so still a lot of people were dying from it. We finally eradicated smallpox from the face of the earth. It still lives in labs, though. So if somebody stupid makes a war with somebody else stupid and they unleash it, we could have smallpox again. I've been vaccinated. I have a little scar on my arm, and I am, I'm glad that I got it as a child. My mother was an ER nurse. She wanted to make sure that we were protected. When they came out with the polio vaccine in the 60s, I got it. And I'm so glad that I was protected. It was still common to see people with braces on their legs when I was growing up from having had polio. So there will always be people that don't trust the government and don't trust the vaccines that come out. But if you go in a cemetery and you see all those child graves and you have a heart, you just don't want children to suffer like that. We're so removed from severe illness that COVID was a wake-up call to many of us because we haven't had anything much dangerous except when measles or mumps breaks out on a college campus. And then we start seeing people with meningitis, people who die, people who get permanently disabled from the high fevers. I'm telling you, I don't know what's wrong with people who are supposed to know better and talking all this stuff about vaccines not being safe, and then people think they're not. And it's totally not true. I don't know. Everybody loves a conspiracy theory. Let's face it, I like conspiracy theories sometimes, but I don't give them a lot of my time or energy, or, I really don't delve into that stuff because it is a Pandora's box. You can start doubting everything, and it can tear away your faith if you're religious. It can tear away your family if they get sucked down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. The truth will set you free. That's what Lincoln said. And he was a very wise man. I really like that statement. And there's so much information on the internet, you have to be careful about your sources. That's why I go to cdc.gov, I go to nih.gov, I look at American Psychological Association.com, apa.com. I look at sites that are reputable, that do research, that publish research, and they don't do slipshod studies that don't mean anything. When a researcher goes to put in a study, and I learned this in my psychological statistics class in college, so okay, this is where I learned it, this is where it's coming from. When a scientist designs a study, they come up with a thesis statement to either prove or disprove. And they have to write that statement carefully because they basically base all of their arguments why they should be allowed to do the study and why they should have funding for it on their premise statement. So they'll do a study to see if a certain medication is effective. They'll do a study to say if a certain vaccine is effective. And they define what effective means in that study. Now, when you hear about a study on the news, they're not going to go into detail on that, and they probably don't understand the jargon involved because every scientific discipline has its own set of words. And if you don't know what those words mean, you might misinterpret what they mean. So the press does its best, but these people are not scientists. They are looking at these studies and saying, okay, how can I make this an interesting news article? So they might say something that they think is true because they've just skimmed over the research. They don't really understand it well. So they might draw the wrong conclusion. But the study itself is very careful to spell everything out. If they mention participants, they define who are the participants. You've got so many people in a control group, we didn't do anything to them. We've got so many people in a control group that got the medicine or vaccine or whatever, and they randomize it so that people don't know whether they are getting a sugar pill or they're getting the vaccine or whatever. So there are ways that they can, so if people are reporting symptoms, they're not biased by whether they got the real thing or not. They're told this is one of the conditions that they agree to when they participate in a study. That usually on just about any study you can name, half the people get the thing that they're trying to prove or disprove that it works, and half of them don't get anything. But nobody is told whether they're getting the real thing or not. The researcher keeps track of that. So they can ask them questions about how do you feel since you've taken this, whatever, and what symptoms do you have, and they get a medical treatment if they have any adverse reactions. I mean, the whole 9 yards. So doctors are involved in these studies, and they are very careful not to endanger human life. They want to make sure that they're careful that the people who get the vaccine, they watch them carefully for side effects. They're ready to send them to the hospital if they have any adverse reactions that are serious. They have to take careful note of every symptom, every incidence of somebody going to the hospital after it. I mean, these studies use the scientific method. They're not just pulled out of a hat. And a well-designed study will have the control group that doesn't get any intervention, and they just take what is happening with that control group. So when you hear about a study on the news, you're not getting half the story. You are getting one reporter's interpretation of what the study is about, probably from the summary. And they may misinterpret terms. You have to, if you're a researcher, you have to define, what's your control group? What age group are you studying? What intervention are you doing? And you have to take careful notes on everything that the people who are getting the intervention. But you also take those careful notes on everybody who is not getting the intervention. So you can compare the two and say, okay, out of X number of people, so many had this side effect. And if it's reported in the control group, you just discount that because just being in the control group is not going to cause that. So you look for correlations between the two groups. So you're going to say, well, I didn't have anybody in the unvaccinated group reporting this symptom, but I've got, maybe 2 out of 100 or whatever the percentage is, and the larger the group, of course, the better data you get out of it. But when you get your stuff off the news, it's very difficult, very, very difficult to tell what, has the reporter got a bias between, they're trying to disprove that this study means anything, or they're trying to prove that this study is important. A good reporter will not put their opinion in their news. But you have a lot of people nowadays that want to get readers or viewers, and so they're going to blow things out of proportion. So it's let the viewer beware as far as the quality of the information. So you want to look for people who don't have a stake in the results of that study. For example, Big Pharma, you know, if you're looking at a commercial for a prescription drug, they're required to say, oh, it can have these side effects. But on the other hand, they're going to put, happy families and people doing normal things, and they're going to say, look, the quality of life of these people is improved. But if it's coming from the pharmaceutical company, you don't know if they're telling the truth or not. But if it's coming from an agency like the CDC, who does a lot of research and sponsors a lot of research, and they have very strict guidelines for how this research is conducted, then you can believe them more because they don't have a stake in convincing you that something is good unless you're talking about COVID-19 and the vaccines, and people are dying, and this vaccine can save people's lives. So they have a stake in the public good to try to keep people alive. That's what any medical doctor wants. They want their patients to live. So, it's very difficult when you have certain news medias that spout lies all the time and they want to just make everything political. Public health is not politics, and it should not be political. But you've got so many people on the Republican side, on the Democratic side, arguing with each other. And it's sad because people are dying. And, these people that want to argue, it's ridiculous that they value human life so little that they would talk against the vaccine when the vaccine can save lives and it is proven to save lives. So that's my opinion. Anyway, let's go to the next topic. All right, here's my next topic. Unintended consequences of COVID-19 mitigation strategies. Okay, so here's the link. I'm gonna go to the chat. Nobody has checked in or asked me a question, so I'll just continue on with this. So, here's mitigation strategies for racial and ethnic health disparities. So I'm going to talk about that for a little bit. So let me click on the link. This is also from the CDC because they're such a good source. Okay. Let's talk about, the whole article has 8 topics. It's got an introduction, it's got risk of exposure to COVID-19, risk of severe illness or death from COVID-19, disparities in COVID-19 illness, disparities in COVID-19 associated hospitalizations, disparities in COVID-19 deaths, and unintended consequences of COVID-19 mitigation strategies, which is the topic I chose to look at, and what we can do to move towards health equity. So, COVID-19 mitigation activities, that's a horse choker of a phrase. What is it? What does it mean? It's actions that people and communities can take to slow the spread of the virus. Simply put, that's the purpose of any public health organization. If you get hit with a pandemic, you want to slow the spread of the virus or technically stop it if you can. So, it's a good purpose. It includes personal prevention practices and actions to safely maintain operations in healthy environments in facilities and workplaces. So, things that people can do to prevent the spread of the virus. Some of these include hand washing, staying home when you're sick, practicing social distancing, and wearing a face mask. And there's nothing political here. Wearing a face mask does not hurt you. It may be uncomfortable, but it is not going to make you suffocate. Your blood oxygen is not going to drop to the point that you're going to go to the hospital or anything. I mean, there are all these ridiculous claims out there. They're totally unfounded. I have asthma, and I wear a mask when I go in places. Now, with asthma, I could just say, oh, I can't breathe with that thing on. But I'm not going to, because it's not that uncomfortable. Yes, it is a little uncomfortable, especially when it's hot. But it's not so uncomfortable that I think my health is threatened or that I think it's going to bring on an asthma attack. I have never had an asthma attack because of wearing a mask. I have had an asthma attack from breathing in things that trigger my allergies in the outside environment. And that mask actually helps me not to have an asthma attack because it also filters out things like pollen, molds, and other things like that. So actually, the mask is my friend as an asthmatic. So, you know, one lady I was sitting in a waiting room with, and I was wearing my mask because I didn't want to get COVID. This was back before we had a vaccine. Here she is, she's big and pregnant, and she's refusing to wear a mask. And the place I wasn't requiring them. And I asked her nicely why she wasn't wearing a mask. And I thought maybe she just forgot it and brought it with her. And, if I reminded her, she'd say, oh, I need to wear that. No, she says, oh, I'm pregnant. I can't breathe. I'm not wearing a mask. And I'm thinking, lady, don't you want to protect your baby? You're going to go out and maybe get COVID-19 and get in a coma and have your baby while you're in a coma and you can't be aware of it. There have been stories on the news like that of pregnant moms that delivered their baby and maybe they died without ever seeing the baby's face. That would be horrible. Just horrible. And children are dying of this disease. They're not dying in great numbers. But I think if you've got the risk in a school of even one student dying of COVID, I think everybody should be masking up. That's just my opinion. It's not hurting people. And it's so important. What's more important than our children? Our children are our future. We should be protecting all of them. And to politicize this mask stuff and denying the virus, it is sad to hear doctors talk about on the news that people are begging for the vaccine before they intubate them. And the process of ventilation is horrible. They have to put a huge tube down your throat. When they ventilate you, that's what that is. You have to have a machine breathing for you because you are too weak to breathe on your own. That's the only time they intubate people, is absolutely if they are dying of lack of oxygen. That is why they intubate them. And it is a horrible, horrible experience. I have not been intubated, but I saw my mother hooked up to a ventilator. And it was traumatizing for me just to see her having to have a machine breathe for her. And this was in 1982. So I'm telling you, my mother died of pneumonia. And that is what they have always had to do since they've had ventilators. It is a horrible thing to have to do to somebody. And when the medical folks come in and intubate somebody, they are not happy with it. It's very traumatic to these workers, and we're seeing more trauma for our health workers because the psychological effects of a preventable surge of people coming into your emergency room, it does things to people's minds. We've had nurses quitting because they just can't stand it anymore. I saw a documentary on nurses during the pandemic, and it's really sad because nurses are getting burned out. These surges are horrible, and you're having to choose who lives and who dies because you don't have enough staff to be able to take care of people. And it takes a lot of people to care for people on ventilators. This is a very sad truth, but doctors actually have a protocol to follow of who lives and who dies when there's not enough medical care to go around. I would not wish that on my worst enemy if they were a medical person. But doctors are having to make these decisions in every hospital in the United States just about now. So to say that, oh, I'm not going to wear a mask, is so selfish. If you don't have a medical reason for not wearing a mask, then it's despicable. It is the epitome of just, well, I'm not going to do it and nobody can make me. Don't you care about those around you? It's so cold-hearted. So you're going to say that you're not going to wear a mask and you know that you can get COVID and not even have any symptoms and you can be spreading it. I can't fathom that. I just can't fathom that. But okay, so I'm talking about unintended consequences of COVID-19 mitigation strategies. So we're talking things like hand washing, staying home when you're sick, practicing social distancing, wearing a face mask. There may be restrictions on travel and gatherings, academic and business closures, and stay-home orders. The goal of this is to minimize COVID-19 cases and deaths, but they can also have economic, social, and secondary health consequences. Many of the inequities in social determinants of health, I'm reading from the article here on the CDC site, many of these inequities drive poor health outcomes, such as neighborhood and physical environment, health and healthcare, occupation, economic stability, and education. These inequities may become worse during the COVID-19 response, disproportionately affecting racial and ethnic minority groups. In other words, people of color and people who are in a minority group, if they're Muslim, if they're Jewish, if they're, LGBTQ, Um, you know, there are inequities that may become worse during COVID-19. You might have lost wages, unemployment, loss of health insurance as a result of business closures, stress and social isolation because of restrictions on social gatherings, and the stigma of having or being suspected of having the virus if you're wearing a mask. These unintended consequences can cause a lot of difficulties in communities with limited resources and communities that have more restrictions on your social life. So, discrimination exists in systems meant to protect well being and health. It includes housing, education, criminal justice, and finance. Discrimination, which includes racism, shapes social and economic factors that can put racial and ethnic minority groups at higher risk for COVID-19 infection. They contribute to worse economic, social, and secondary health consequences of these mitigation strategies. So, here's some bullet points for these disproportionate impacts of mitigation strategies. In other words, when businesses impose a mask, you've got to wear a mask in my store, or you've got a social distance and all this, and whether a store can open or not, or stay open. Okay, unemployment and loss of health insurance. That's the first one. Racial and ethnic minorities experienced higher job losses. And this financial problem can result in loss of health insurance, reduced access to health care, and food insecurity and housing insecurity. In other words, the risk of becoming homeless and just being able to go see a doctor. If it costs that much, you may have to choose between going to the doctor or putting food on your table. Definitely a hard thing. Food insecurity, let's talk about that. The pandemic may increase that for some people because they lost their job or their children aren't getting school lunches, and maybe those school lunches are subsidized. Food security is when people do not have stable access to food or do not eat consistently because of lack of money and other resources. In 2016, 15.6 million U.S. households were food insecure at some time during the year. 15.6 million people is like the population of New York City. That many people not having enough to eat on a regular basis in 2016. And it's worse now. We have figures from 2016. We don't have the data yet on 2021 and, those other years. So, they're probably going to find that food insecurity rose sharply during the pandemic. In 2016, non-Hispanic Black households were nearly twice as likely to be food insecure than the national average. 22.5% for Black households versus 12.3% for everybody else. So, and 18.5% of Hispanic or Latino households reported food insecurity. Big problem. From a March 2020 survey, we know that 44% of adults were food insecure in the past 30 days among households with incomes that were less than 250% of the federal poverty level. So that's like, let's see, 2.5 times lower than the federal poverty level. So almost half of those adults had problems getting food. That's really sad. There were higher percentages of food insecurity among non-Hispanic Black adults, Hispanic or Latino adults, and people of other race or ethnicity compared with non-Hispanic White or Asian adults. And that food insecurity kind of went along with challenges meeting basic needs such as health care, ability to pay your rent, issues with unemployment. It's associated with poor health, which could further worsen health disparities by race and ethnicity. This affects us handicapped people, because you already know that if you're disabled, your income is going to take a big hit because maybe you can't be at work as often as somebody who's normal and healthy. So definitely, food insecurity is a problem for everybody, particularly if you're disabled and you're a person of color. So, you're going to have worse outcomes. Housing instability. Higher unemployment rates for some racial and ethnic minority groups during the pandemic increased financial instability and may lead to greater risk of eviction and homelessness. Now, homelessness is bad enough for an adult man or woman, but what about if your whole family with children are homeless? We have a lot of families in every homeless camp. There are children who are homeless who are going to public school and people don't even know they're homeless. So, there are people who are working, who are going to work every day, but they can't afford the rent. So they are living on the streets. We're talking 50% of homeless people are people who have lost their job or people, well, all right, let me go back. Not people who have lost their job, people who are working. You may say with all the help signs out, people have no excuse for getting a job, for not getting a job. Well, half of all homeless people have a job. They are going to their job every day, and they have not got a roof over their head. They're living out of their car, they're living in a homeless camp, they're living in a tent, or they're just sleeping on the street because they have nowhere to go. We are a heartless country. We absolutely are. Okay, the next bullet point is preventative healthcare services. The pandemic has further strained the U.S. healthcare system. There have been disruptions in providing routine, preventative, and other non-emergency care. Because if you've got a surge and you've got people flooding your emergency room, somebody who's maybe not got COVID, but they've got a severe flu, or they're having a heart attack, or they've got an infection, they are not going to the emergency room to wait for hours and hours and hours and hours. They just don't go, and they try to treat it at home, sometimes with disastrous results. So there have been, people may be afraid. Also, routine well child care, preventative dental care, and immunizations. People may be afraid they could be exposed to COVID if they go to the doctor. An estimated 41% of adults in the U.S., recent study here, avoided medical care during the pandemic because of concerns about catching COVID at the doctor's office. Avoiding urgent or emergency care was more common among people with underlying medical conditions compared to people without those conditions. Non-Hispanic, Black and Hispanic or Latino adults compared with non-Hispanic white adults, and people with disabilities compared to people without disabilities. That's a fifth of the country, y'all. That's a fifth of our United States citizens have severe disabilities. Avoiding or delaying care could increase the risk of severe illness or death from other medical conditions or COVID-19. Substantial reductions in orders for vaccines started the week after the national emergency declaration on March 13, 2020. The decline in orders for children aged 24 months or younger was smaller compared with vaccination orders for older children and have since started to increase. So people are not getting the routine vaccinations for their children that they need to have. This is a big problem. And the ongoing COVID pandemic is a reminder of the importance of vaccination, particularly for non-Hispanic, Black, Hispanic, or Latino, and non-Hispanic Asian people who had lower vaccination coverage for some vaccines before the pandemic. So there's discrimination everywhere. Let's look at mental health and bereavement. This is a large problem in the United States. Okay, under mental health and bereavement, there's a couple of bullet points. First is mental health. This pandemic has been stressful for many people. Fear and anxiety can be overwhelming and cause strong emotions in adults and children. Some groups may be more affected than others. Studies about mental health found inconsistent effect on the COVID-19 pandemic on different racial and ethnic groups. One study found elevated depressed symptoms and fear of COVID-19 among racial and ethnic minority populations combined compared with non-Hispanic white people like me. So you've got more depression in all of these ethnic groups than you do with white non-Hispanic people like me. That is not a function of medicine per se, but it's a function of where do you live? Where can you go to the doctor? How much does it cost to go to the doctor? All these things. I mean, there are racial disparities all around us. And there are some doctors who just, don't want to fool with poor people. And it's sad, but it happens. Most medical people, and I want to emphasize this, most doctors, nurses, nurse aides, lab techs, ultrasound techs, all the people that do your tests in the hospital, all the people who clean up your rooms. The vast majority of these people do these jobs because they care about humans and they want to help. If they're going to do a job, they want to work in healthcare because they care about people. Overwhelmingly, if you look at studies done on people in healthcare, the vast majority of them want to help everybody, and they're not going to look at what color you are, what sexual orientation you have, what religion you are, or what political party you're in. The vast majority of them just want to save lives. So they don't have any motivations to shove a vaccine at you because of their political beliefs or whatever. They want you to live, people. They are concerned that people are dying, and just taking the shot, you may be sick for a couple of days, but that means your immune system got a good response. It is not, they're not injecting COVID in people. The vaccines are not COVID. They are a part of the genetic material of COVID that trains your body to give a response. And that response is antibodies. And you need your antibodies to be activated against the COVID. And what they do with the mRNA vaccine is they just isolate the spike proteins. You've seen pictures of COVID, I'm sure. It's a ball with spikes, with these triangular spikes all over it. And so what the mRNA vaccine does is it mimics those spikes, just the spikes, so that if your body sees spikes on a virus, then it's going to say, oh, we better attack that. So you can't get COVID from a vaccine. Any of the vaccines, whether you are going with an mRNA vaccine, which is new territory, but they have made vaccines for Ebola, for example. I mean, they have done vaccines before with the mRNA technology. It's just that this is the first time we've ever had widespread use of one of these vaccines. But the technology has been around for a while. It's proven technology. It's not something that they just came up with out of a hat, like a, tinfoil hat or something. No, it is real science. So fortunately, they had this technology already, and they applied it to COVID, and it worked. We have a vaccine that works. We have 3 vaccines that work. We have more in the wings that will come out that work. So, but the Pfizer and the Moderna are mRNA. It's new, but it's not brand spanking new. It's just the first opportunity to put a vaccine out that is based on a piece of the genetic code. It's not the whole genetic code, so you can't get COVID. It's a piece of it. It's the spike protein. It's not the insides, So, and it's not even COVID. It's a protein that has the same shape on the cell. So it's not even COVID. So I want to make that clear. When you get the vaccine, you're not being injected with COVID. Now, that's Pfizer and Moderna. Then the other one is the Johnson & Johnson. And the Johnson & Johnson is a killed virus vaccine, I believe. I may be mistaken on that. But I think it's more like the traditional, it's still dead. It can't grow. It can't divide. It can't do anything to you. This is the same technology as your tetanus shot, your measles vaccine, your chickenpox vaccine. These are your traditional vaccines. So you still can't catch COVID from it. When you get a flu shot, it is killed virus vaccine. It is not going to make you sick with the virus where you could give it to other people. That's just not going to happen because it's dead. But having it injected into you makes your body recognize it. Oh, foreign invader, we better get the army going. And then they go and kill it when they see it. So, regardless of the particular technology involved in a vaccine, there's several different strategies that scientists have found works for vaccines. But it doesn't matter what kind of technology is used. The end result is what counts. It saves lives. Because if you have a good immune response to the virus when your body sees it, then you are much more likely to survive it. You are 99.5% more likely to survive because of the people in the hospital who are dying of COVID. That's 0.5% of vaccinated people. 0.5%. 0.05%. That's not much. So your chances are pretty darn good if you get the vaccine. Your chances are very, very bad if you don't get the vaccine. And there again, some people will have this COVID-19 virus and not have any symptoms at all, especially children. A lot of times will not have a single symptom, but yet they can transmit it. And, I've been hearing on the news that it is as contagious as smallpox. Any parent knows that if your kid gets exposed to chickenpox, if there is one case of chickenpox in your preschool class or your daycare, it's going to spread like wildfire, and just about 100% of those kids are going to have it. Now, that's pretty contagious. It's a lot more contagious than the common cold. So, what can I say? Go get the vaccine. So, back to the article. Okay, so mental health. Okay, so we found out that anybody who's not white is going to be more likely to get really depressed from the pandemic. However, another study found out, compared with white young adults aged 18 to 30, Asian American young adults were less likely to report levels of poor mental health symptoms, including depression. And both Asian American and Hispanic or Latino young adults were less likely to report high levels of anxiety. It's interesting. I wouldn't expect that. The effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on mental health may be influenced by the intersection of age, income, employment, and other social factors in addition to race and ethnicity. Okay. And then you have bereavement. This is the other main topic under mental health and bereavement. So the other half of it is bereavement. Many people are experiencing grief during the COVID-19 pandemic. Grief is a normal response to loss during or after a disaster or traumatic event. Grief can happen in response to loss of life as well as to drastic changes in daily routines and ways of life that usually bring us comfort and a feeling of stability. Some groups may be more likely to experience loss of a loved one due to COVID-19. Non-Hispanic Black people were found to be more likely to have a close relative who died from COVID-19. Okay, and it goes on to make a closing statement about mental health and bereavement. Inequities in the social determinants of health increase the negative effects of the COVID-19 pandemic for some racial and ethnic minority groups. We need to work together to reduce the negative effects of what we're doing to stop COVID-19, including working to address inequities in the social determinants of health. So, there's a lot of good stuff in this article. So, and it's only the 7th part of 8. So, if you want, go pick a topic that's interesting to you and just take a look at it, because there's a lot of good stuff in this. It's from December 10th, 2020. And, you know, we really need to take care of everybody. We can't afford to be without any ethnic group. Our country needs to pull together, whether you're Democrat or Republican, whatever your religious beliefs or lack of, whatever your sexual orientation, whether you're disabled or not, whether you're homeless or not, whether you are incarcerated or not, we all need to pull together. We have a crisis that is affecting the whole country. So we need to not make it worse by fighting with each other. We need to love each other. We need to uplift each other. We need to say, we're going to quit blaming people for the pandemic. I mean, it's become so popular to blame Chinese people for the pandemic. It's not their fault. Most of the evidence points to bats. Bats gave the disease to pangolins. Some Chinese like to eat pangolins. There is a little bit of evidence that a lab in Wuhan was studying coronaviruses, but that's a normal thing for researchers to do. If you've got a possibility of a pandemic, you have to study it, right? So you can understand it. So it's not very likely, with the lab procedures that all the labs in the world follow, it is not likely that the pandemic escaped out of that lab. And if it did, I would think that it was a mistake, not something intentional. I don't trust the Chinese government, but the Chinese are a good people. They can't help they've got a crummy government. I've personally known some people from communist China, and they were very nice people. I really don't think we need to be blaming the Chinese people for COVID. We're going to have more pandemics. We have had them in the past, and we will have more. I think we are not going to ever be able to throw away our masks or have expectations that we're not going to have social distancing. I think we need to make major changes in a lot of the things we do, down to the way we design toilets, because the toilets we have right now spray germs into the air. It becomes airborne, and it's a good way to spread disease. We need to redesign our toilets. People are doing this. We need to redesign our workplaces. When I was working, I caught everything. Now we know that if you have A or B blood, you are in for it. You have a weaker immune system than people who have other types of blood. I think we ought to be after insurance companies to cover blood tests to see what blood type you are. Most Americans go around their whole lives without knowing what blood type they are unless they have an operation or unless they donate blood. An easy way to find out what your blood type is to go donate blood to the Red Cross. They'll tell you what your blood type is. But I found out mine because I was curious about blood types, and Mama said to me, I was visiting her in the hospital. She says, "You want to know what blood type you've got?" I said, "Yeah." And so she said, "You'll have to let them draw blood out of your arm." And I'm like scared of needles. I was a little kid, but I said, "I can do that. I want to know what blood type I have." So she arranged for a nurse to come and draw my blood, and they tested it, and it was B positive. And so I've known from a very young age about blood types, and come to find out that my dad was B positive and my daughter is B positive. So, you know, we're a B positive family, and having B blood means lower immune system. And I caught everything when my daughter was in school. She caught everything and she brought it home to me. So, I was missing a lot of work. I always had trouble in school as a child and as an adult at work with being able to stay out when I was sick. I couldn't. I had to go to work and school sick a lot because of the stupid attendance requirements. So I firmly believe that we need to change our workplaces to allow people to go home when they are sick. Even if it's not a pandemic, it would help people like me to hold on to their jobs. If we had had measures in place like this, if we had had UV sanitizers in my work's air conditioning system, if we had had air filtration, if we had had UV sanitizers to put in our rooms and sanitize everything every day, if we had had these measures, I probably could have kept working until maybe I was 50 instead of age 40. I got disabled at age 40 because I couldn't, I was making up time every week and I just couldn't make up enough time anymore. The OSHA rules do apply, and they say that you have to be at work so many days, and it doesn't matter if you're willing for them to take it out of your paycheck. If you're absent so many days, they will not keep you. They will fire you. So we need more lenient laws so that disabled people can be out when they need to. What if you have conditions to where you have to have operations maybe once a year or several times a year? How can you hold a job under those circumstances if you've got the stipulation that you have to not exceed your leave? And when I worked for the state, I got 1 day of sick leave and 1 day of vacation every month. And I knew a lot of people at work that had just, they had years saved up of their leave that they had never used because they never got sick. But yet here I was using up my sick day, I was using up my vacation day, and then I was still having to be out. If I got the flu, I was not able to come back to work for a week, and it adds up. So it's widespread discrimination against the handicapped, because if you have problems where you have to be out a lot, people look at you like you're a drug addict. And let's talk about addiction. If you're addicted, that is a disability. People with addiction should be able to have help, and they should be able to afford help. We have, if you count 4 people, one of them is addicted to something. This is a huge problem that we are just ignoring, and the politicians are ignoring it. But we need to see addiction as what it is. It is an illness. It is not a choice. You know, maybe it was their choice to take the first dose of the drug or whatever, but teenagers make mistakes. And people of all ages make mistakes. We're going to condemn these people for the rest of their lives because they got addicted? Really? Have some human compassion, for Pete's sakes. You know, I've never been addicted. I can't say what that's like. And, you know, if you're the 3/4 of America who haven't been addicted, then maybe you just don't want to understand addiction. But believe me, it is a heartbreaking thing for a family to have a family member who is addicted. And if you are addicted, you are spending every dime on that drug, and you get sick if you don't have it. So that's strong motivation to keep getting it. But yet there is no help for people to get off the stuff. And if you have no money, you can't afford to go into one of those residential treatment places that, you know, the rich people go to. If you don't have money, you are out of luck. Or if your family doesn't have money to send you, you are out of luck. We need to have universal health care so that we can take care of people, including addicted people. We don't need to fill up the jails with them. Do you really want to spend billions of dollars of your hard-earned tax money to build jails? Why aren't we using part of that money to build mental hospitals? Small community facilities that don't have many beds so that the risk to the community is smaller. Have a mental health facility in every neighborhood, have some temporary beds and have some permanent rooms. You know, you don't want to have homeless people who have to be cleaned up after. You know, if you've got a big homeless population, then your municipality is probably paying a lot of your hard-earned tax dollars to clean up these camps. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. And half of those people out on the street, they're mentally ill. They are not mentally competent. So you've got a lot of people who are not mentally competent in jail. And we throw away the key. We don't want to educate them. We don't want to provide them ways of coming back into the community after they have paid their price to society. I'm not talking about robbers, rapists, and murderers. Maybe people who do petty theft. I'm not talking about people who hold people up at gunpoint and threaten to kill them over what's in their wallet. I'm talking about people who had possession of a small amount of drugs and they got put in jail and they have served time. Then they get out, they've got a police record, they can't get a good job. They are looked down upon. Maybe some of their basic rights of a United States citizen has been taken away. We put people in jail and we throw away the key. And we think, oh, they all belong there. They're all bad people. what we don't want to realize is that a lot of them are not bad people. They are people who have made a mistake, maybe as a teenager. Didn't you make mistakes when you were a teenager? I sure did. Why should we punish people for the rest of their lives for something they did as a teenager? Can we have some human compassion here? I'm not talking about if they killed someone. That's different. That's different. If they're a threat to society, they belong in jail. But I'm not so sure about crimes of passion, whether we should keep them in jail for the rest of their lives. Yeah, it's not right to take another human's life. But we are human and we do lose our tempers. And if there happens to be a gun handy or a knife, people can be in abuse situations and kill their abuser, and then they end up going to jail for the rest of their lives. Is that really fair? If somebody has been beating you and you're afraid for your life and you kill them and you get put in jail for murder, premeditated murder, now that's a different animal. That, I think people should be locked up for the rest of their lives if they're planning to kill somebody. But as far as, I'm not sure of the morality of putting people in jail at the numbers that we do, because we have more people incarcerated in our country than communist China. So, yeah, I think we need to have more compassion for people in jail. That's what I think. Not the hardened criminals, not the ones that don't care about human life and they're sociopaths. They need to be in jail. They need to stay there. But people who make a mistake, they pay their debt to society, and they come out, they ought to have help to get on the right track so that they don't end up back in jail. I think that we should take responsibility for making sure that if someone's mentally ill, they don't belong in jail. We need a place for them to go. And in the 80s, we closed all of our mental institutions. There are private institutions, yeah, for drug abuse and stuff. They're very expensive. The average person can't afford them, so they don't get treatment. If we want to have less people in jail, we need to look at some hard decisions. Are we going to provide mental health facilities? And if so, what are those going to look like? We need to do them differently than we used to do them. But we need a place for people with dangerous mental illnesses. They're in the minority now. There aren't that many of them. But the ones that are out there are a danger to themselves and everybody else. So there needs to be a humane place to put them, to keep them, so that society is safe and so they get the treatment they need. But you have a lot of homeless people in prison when they haven't really done anything wrong, but they're just vagrants. We need to look at some of these things. All people in prison are not murderers and rapists. There are a lot of people that just made a mistake when they were young and they didn't get the support they needed to be able to function on the outside, and they do something to get put back in because they're more comfortable with being in jail and being told what to do than they are with the stigma that is attached to being an ex-con. People don't want to think about that. They think, it's just too complicated. But it is complicated, and that's why we haven't had a solution to it yet. We need more people thinking about it, and we need more legislators who are open to the idea of spending our tax money more wisely. So, all right, let's go back to disabilities. We're going to go to the next one that I got. All right. Here's advice for those who lost loved ones to COVID-19. So let's talk about that a little bit, because my topic for the evening is grief and disability. So COVID is touching us all, and let's take a look at what the CDC suggests if you've lost a loved one. Grieving the loss of a loved one while coping with the fear and anxiety related to COVID-19 can be very overwhelming. Social distancing, stay-at-home orders, and limits on the size of in-person gatherings have changed the way friends and family can gather and grieve, including holding traditional funeral services, regardless of whether or not the person's death was due to COVID. However, these types of prevention strategies are important to slow the spread of it. So, here's some actions you can take to help you cope with these feelings of grief after the loss of a loved one. Connecting with other people. Invite people to call you or host conference calls with family members and friends to stay connected. I wish my family wanted to do that. Ask family and friends to share stories and pictures with you via mailed letters, email, phone, or video chat, or via apps or social media that allow groups to share with each other. Group chat, group messaging, Facebook. Coordinate a time and date for family and friends to honor your loved one by reciting a selected poem, spiritual reading, or prayer within their own households. Okay, then there's creating memories or rituals. Develop a virtual memory book, blog, or web page to remember your loved one, and ask family and friends to contribute their memories and stories. A lot of funeral homes are putting these pages up, and then all you have to do is just go on it and give them your email. They don't ask for financial information. And then you can create an account and you can go on and add a memory to the loved one's page. I did that recently and it's a good thing. It's very healing. Take part in an activity such as planting a tree or preparing a favorite meal that has significance to you and the loved one who died. A lot of folks on that site were buying trees to plant, and I think that's a great way to remember a loved one. And then a big thing, asking for help from others. Seek out grief counseling or mental health services, support groups or hotlines, especially those that can be offered over the phone or online. I've had therapy online. And I really prefer it to going in person because I don't have to drive there. I don't have to have the stress of what if I'm late to the appointment and miss it, or, it's just very nice to be able to get therapy online. And that's one thing COVID has done for us, that therapy is available for many, many different places. So it's a good thing. It's a very good thing. Seek spiritual support from faith-based organizations, including your religious leaders and congregations, if applicable. If you are a member of any church, then that religion probably has a website. And I know that One of my relatives, while she was in the hospital, got a lot of support and help through her religion's website. So definitely, it's a great resource for those who are grieving. Seek support from other trusted community leaders and friends. And, even if you're not a member of a religious organization, you still probably have friends. There may be communities that you belong to anyway. So, even if you've just got a friend to talk to, that's so healing to be able to just talk to your friend about your grief. So, I hope that everybody grieving here has somebody to talk to. So, during the pandemic, family and close friends of a person who died of COVID may experience stigma, such as social avoidance or rejection. Especially right now that a lot of Republicans are getting sick, and, if there's been a family split because of politics, that can be very, very just devastatingly difficult. So, you may have people saying, well, they should have gotten the shot. They deserve to die. That is not fair. Please don't say that to anybody. That's just not humane at all. Some things go beyond politics and personal beliefs, but nobody should be stigmatized because of dying of COVID. If your loved one died of COVID, their life was valid, no matter what their political beliefs, their religious beliefs, their sexual orientation, whatever. All lives are precious. And if we lose one, we all are diminished. So this is very important. I'm glad this article brings it up that, there may be some stigma if you lose somebody due to COVID, and especially nowadays that we have the vaccine. I'm hoping that, stigma hurts everyone by creating fear or anger towards other people. Some people may avoid contacting you, your family members, and friends when they would normally reach out to you. Stigma related to COVID-19 is less likely to occur when people know the facts and share them with extended family, friends, or others in your community. And there's a whole section on if you feel distress from other types of loss or change. During the pandemic, you may feel grief due to loss of a job, inability to connect in person with friends, family, or religious organizations, missing special events and milestones, such as graduations, weddings, vacations, and experiencing drastic changes to daily routines and ways of life that bring comfort. You may also feel a sense of guilt for grieving over losses that seem less important than loss of life, like gaining a disability. I'm putting that in there. It goes on. Grief is a universal emotion. There is no right or wrong way to experience it, and all losses are significant. And it's very true. So, here are some ways to cope with those feelings of grief. Acknowledge your losses and your feelings of grief. Find ways to express your grief. Some people express grief and find comfort through art, gardening, writing, talking to friends or family, cooking, music, gardening, or other creative practices. Here's the second one. Consider developing new rituals in your daily routine to stay connected with your loved ones, to replace those that have been lost. People who live together may consider board games and exercising together outdoors. People who live alone or are separated from their loved ones may consider interacting through phone calls and apps that allow for playing games together virtually. And the third one, if you're worried about future losses, try to stay in the present and focus on aspects of your life that you have control over right now. It's so easy to fall into that trap of, what's going to happen? What if so and so? What if, try to put the what ifs aside. You've got enough to worry about. So, worry about the stuff that you have control over. For example, with disabilities, you have no control over your disability. You may have a disabling condition that you can mitigate some with medication or physical therapy or whatever, whatever your medical people offer to you. But all in all, you can do all that, but you can't get rid of the disability unless it's a temporary disability. But, if it's a permanent disability, then here you are, and you can do some things to help it. And I encourage you to do all that your medical professionals are suggesting to you. But as far as you may have to choose between those, and you may have to say, well, this might help me, but I don't think it's enough of a chance that it will help me that I have to go through so and so. And that's up to you. That's why you have your medical professionals. You can discuss your options and pick the ones that you want to do, and the ones that you don't want to do or you don't feel like the benefit would be worth what you have to give up for it. You have a lot of decisions to make when you're disabled, but you got to take care of yourself. And you want to try to be in a calm state of mind when you're making decisions about your disability. And keep in mind that while you're in a grief process, you probably don't want to make any really major decisions until you've come to terms with it, had some time to cry and grieve, and, be kind to yourself during the grieving process. And if you're grieving disability and not the loss of a loved one, it's not any less valid. You need to give yourself time to grieve. And it can be difficult because a lot of people say, well, what? You're just feeling sorry for yourself. Nope, not going there. If you have grief because you have become disabled, or you've gained a new disability, or you're not progressing as fast as you thought you were, that is valid. It is okay to feel grief about loss of ability or lack of progress or anything that makes you feel sad. You are allowed to feel sad, and you're allowed to grieve that. Don't let it paralyze you, but just accept it as part of the process. You're going to have some grief about your disability at some point, and it's okay to feel that grief, and it's okay to acknowledge it and let it out. But it's good to find some constructive way to let it out. So these suggestions that they're saying in this article are really helpful. And helping children cope with grief. Children may show grief differently than adults, and there's a whole link on that. I encourage you, if you have children and they're in a grief situation, read that And especially if you have a child that suddenly becomes disabled, you really need to get help and help your child, because it's hard enough if you're a grown up, but picture being a child trying to cope with it. They need all the help they can get. So children may have a particularly hard time understanding and coping with the loss of a loved one. Sometimes children appear sad and talk about missing the person, or they might act out. Other times they play, interact with friends, and do their usual activities. As a result of measures taken to limit the spread of COVID-19, they may also grieve over loss of routines such as going to school, playing with friends. Parents and other caregivers play an important role in helping children process their grief. So, here's some suggestions to support a child who may be experiencing grief. 1. Ask questions to determine the child's emotional state and better understand their perceptions of what happened. 2. Give children permission to grieve by allowing time for children to talk or express thoughts or feelings in creative ways. 3. Provide age and developmentally appropriate answers. You can't explain death to a 3-year-old the same way you would explain it to a 12-year-old. So, look up stuff that tells you, the stages of childhood and what children might be ready for. If you're the parent, you know your child better than anybody on the internet. So I'm not suggesting that you should just go wild on the internet, and you need to look at good sources, and you need to get some ideas of ways you might be able to help your child work through it. There's a lot of help out there, but the internet's like a fire hose and you're trying to drink out of it. The CDC has a lot of good stuff on here. There's plenty of links in this article, so I would suggest starting there. If you've got a child that's going through a grief situation, it's good to listen to them more than you talk, just like you would with a grown-up. Listening is the most powerful thing you can do for somebody who's grieving. Even, if they're angry, just let them be angry. Don't argue with them, just because, it's hard to cope. It's hard for an adult to cope. It's really hard for a child, and they may be really misbehaving a lot more than usual. I helped a 9-year-old through losing her father, and let me tell you, it's not an easy process. But I had the help of her psychologist. So definitely don't be afraid to get help. There is help out there, and, it can be very, very difficult to cope with your grief if your child is acting out. But it's possible. I lived through it, and she lived through it, so you can too. Practice calming and coping strategies with your child. I did a lot of this. Take care of yourself and model coping strategies for your child. I did a lot of that. Maintain routines as much as possible. We did that. Spend time with your child, reading, coloring, or doing other activities they enjoy. And signs that children may need additional assistance include changes in their behavior, such as acting out, not interested in daily activities, changing in eating and sleeping habits, persistent anxiety, sadness, or depression. We went through all of that. Speak to your child's health care provider if troubling reactions seem to go on too long, interfere with school or relationships with friends or family, or you are unsure or concerned about how your child is doing. And then there's a whole list of resources for coping with loss and for children and parents. So I hope this has been helpful. Now let's go to the next topic. We'll go to let's do this one next. The Parental Resources Kit for Childhood. This is a neat resource also from CDC. I'm really going heavily from the CDC here because they really have a lot of good stuff on their website. So let's look at, it's 10:16. I think I'm going to quit here. I'll leave that link with you, and I will leave this link with you. For those of you who might be professionals and are wanting to read something a little more directed towards you, here's a link from the NIH. It's a lot more scholarly. It's not as easy to read, but if you're a professional trying to help people with grief, if you're trying to help your clients with grief, this last link is for you. This is a resource for professionals, and you may be already familiar with it, but just a little boost there. There's a book that is for professionals who are helping others with their grief. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this with you. And my handicap thought for the evening is on grief. So since my whole live stream has been about grief and coping with it, so what I'd like to leave with you is that, remember that there are hotlines. Several of these links that I gave you have references to crisis, and if you're going through a crisis, if you're feeling like harming yourself or having some suicidal thoughts, there are plenty of hotlines that you can call and talk to a therapist immediately, or someone trained to kind of guide you through that and help you to find some meaning to your life to keep you alive. And those hotlines are not just for if you are thinking about killing yourself, that it's also a resource if you are just having a lot of inner pain. And if you don't have anybody to talk to, you can pick up the phone and you can talk to one of these people. They will listen to you and they will suggest things to you. And, if you are low income, make sure and let them know that you are low income and you just don't know where to turn. They might have a list of resources for you that are available in your area. Even though these are national hotlines, they know how to find resources for people. So don't be afraid to use a hotline because, they're gonna think I'm gonna kill myself and they're gonna call 911. No, they don't do that. They will send you help if you want it. But if you want to remain anonymous and just talk to them, you can talk about anything and they will listen. So don't think you have to be in an absolute life-threatening crisis to pick up a crisis hotline number. to call it. There's no reason not to. If you don't have anybody to listen to you and you're just full of emotion and you're hurting, that's time to, if you haven't got anybody, if you haven't got a friend or a relative you can call and talk to, you can call somebody on one of those hotlines and they will talk to you. And they won't think you're crazy. They won't send an ambulance. If you're not feeling like hurting yourself or you're not planning a suicide, they're not going to send anybody to your house. But you can talk to them and you can tell them what's going on and you can be anonymous and they can help you. So there are always resources to help you. And if you're going through just the grief of COVID, there are COVID hotlines just for people like you who are struggling because, we thought the pandemic was gone now that we had the vaccine and here it is again. So, and this won't be the last pandemic we will live through either. I think our lives are going to be changed for many, many years. Because there are other diseases just waiting to spring themselves on us. It's just, I'm not saying that to take away your hope, because we found a vaccine for this one, we'll find a vaccine for the next one. We just need to learn from this experience and push our elected officials to do something so that we can prevent the next one. We don't want to be caught with our pants down like we got caught this time. So I'm hoping that learning about grief may spur you to action, and one of the best things you can do in our democracy is write to your congressman and make sure that they know in no uncertain terms how you feel about these issues, these laws that they're coming up with. And, if you disagree with one, express your opinion. They count up opinions and they will report these to the congressman. So even if you don't get to talk to your congressman, if you just send an email through, there are a lot of agencies that if they are not agencies, but organizations, there's lots of organizations for every issue. Just look up your issue, and usually these organizations will have a little form that you just put in your zip code, and boom, it tells you a little guide of what they're encouraging people to say, but you can erase the whole thing and put in whatever you want. But this will make it easier to write your congressman. You don't have to know a whole bunch of information. You can just, give them the information they ask for, and boom, you've got which congressman, and you've already got a pre-written form letter about this issue. So you can add to it, or you can just send it as it is, or you can just write your own thing. But however you do it, there's no right or wrong way to do this. But you can let your congresspeople know how you feel about the issues that are important to you. And this is whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you are black or white, whether you are of a different sexual orientation. I mean, whatever issues are close to your heart, there's an organization who is fighting for that for you. So you can give them a hand by just lending your name and your address. And yeah, it's going to ask for your name and address because it's a legal thing. They have to have a name and an address on every single petition that is submitted in support of a cause. So it's a normal thing to have to give your name and address because they want to make sure that you are a U.S. citizen or that you have an address, that you pay taxes, whatever, So they're not going to ask you to show your driver's license to prove you're a citizen, okay? It's just if you live in the district, then you're going to have a zip code, you're going to have an address, and that just proves that it's not the same person writing in 999 times to say, oh, I've got 999 signatures on this here petition. No, you have to have unique names and addresses on that petition to be able to submit it to a congressman. So, that's what petitions are all about. It's a grassroots way to let your congressman know what's important to you. So don't be intimidated by the name and address. They may send you some junk mail, but they're not going to defraud you. They're not going to do anything like that. You just give them your name and address to prove that, okay, I am a unique name on this petition. And if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. If you don't trust the organization, don't put your name and address in there. But if you want to go to congress.gov, you can write to your congressman. And it's a little more involved because you have to look up, the House and the Senate have different protocols for how you look them up and what you're going to see when you look them up and stuff like that. I was very disappointed when I wrote to Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's Republican, and I am definitely I'm not a card-carrying Democrat, but I'm a Democrat, And I was concerned about some issues, so I wrote her several times. And I expected at least a form letter reply, which every time I have ever written my congressman, and over my lifetime I have written a good many letters to my congressman, I'll tell you. I've usually gotten a personal reply, but people are busier these days. You're lucky to get a form letter. But if you get a form letter, at least that acknowledges that you have said something. People are a lot more vocal nowadays since the 2020 election. So they are getting volumes more mail than they used to get. So nowadays you're probably going to get a form letter. But Marjorie Taylor Greene did not bother to have a form letter. She sent me her racist newsletter. I was not happy. That is not contact with your congressman. If they can't take the time to write out a form letter to be sent to constituents with worries, this upsets me very much. I have gotten replies from all my congresspeople except for Marjorie Taylor Greene. She is the only one that gave me a newsletter. That's like, really? No. So I didn't like that at all. But I encourage you to write to your congresspeople because in our democracy, the way to change is to let your wishes be known. And that also means when somebody calls you with a survey, answer it, because that's another way that we make our opinions known. We people who are interested in handicaps and in disabilities, or people, if we have a disability, we really need to be speaking up and let our voice be heard. Because, the census does ask you now if you have a disability or if you live in the household with a person with a disability. This is great. They didn't used to ask that. They started asking that in 2000 when I was filling out my census. So I was very happy to see that on there. But it's not enough. We handicapped people don't always live in a subdivision just for handicapped people. We live out in the community. So a community might not even be aware of us. Did you know that in case of a disaster, you can register with your county and you can be put on a list of people with disabilities so that if a disaster comes and they have to go door to door, they'll know, oh, a handicapped person lives here. We better make sure that they got out or whatever. So, or they might need to be rescued. So it helps a community's civil defense organize their resources. So when I moved into this county, Catoosa County, Georgia, I wrote to the civil defense, well, the disaster people, and I told them that I'm a handicapped person. I live at this address. And so they wrote me back and said, thank you. We'll put you on our list. So I get emails whenever there's a tornado or whatever. I get an email to warn me. So it's just one extra way of knowing what's going on. And if shelters are open in my area, I will get notification of that too. Another thing I do is I have the Red Cross app. And the Red Cross app will tell you real time where the shelters are if there's a disaster in your community. So it's good for a handicapped person to be prepared. So I'll leave you with that. And next time we will talk about more stuff. And I wish you a good evening. And let me see who's with me right now. Oh, Academy Impossible and have this too. Welcome, and I'm happy that you chose to spend some time with me this evening. And I will be back tomorrow night. And y'all take care, and I hope the resources I gave are useful to you. Y'all take care. Good night. Mwah.